Welcome inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we're back today for episode 48 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. On today's show, we're going to be talking about running backs. So we're going to continue our series into Dynasty startup rankings. Last week, we talked about quarterbacks. This week, we have running backs. So I have a top 25 running back rankings list, and we're just going to jump right into that. But before we do, as always, make sure you are following this podcast on your platform of choice. We are on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Amazon, you name it, everything out there, we are there. So go follow us. And if you're on social media, go find us on Twitter or X. We're at Dynasty War Room. You can find us on Facebook as well. And like I mentioned, YouTube, go subscribe there at Dynasty War Room. And leave us a 5-star review. That helps on Spotify, Apple, again, any platform. That helps the show grow, so thank you in advance for that. And without further ado, let's just move on into the rankings and talk some running backs. So just like last week, I have broken up my top 25 into different tiers. So a tier-based ranking is a good way to approach your drafts, allows you to group similar players so you have a good idea of where the real drop in talent, drop in value is. So I recommend doing that. I find it helpful, and so I've done that here today. So my top 25 running backs, I have broken into 7 different tiers. So I'll let you know the tiers as we go. And again, running back is a very interesting and unique position when it comes to dynasty startup drafts because they get pushed down the board a little bit, generally speaking, because everyone is focused on acquiring quarterbacks, getting those elite wide receivers. And so running back, given the nature of the position, it's much easier to acquire good, talented running backs through rookie drafts, through trade, than it is in a startup draft, simply because you're likely focused on building out the core of your team, and it is pretty rare to have a running back be a true core piece of your team. There's really only a couple of guys that can fit into that category, so just putting that out there here as we start off the episode. And let's kick things off with tier number 1. There are 2 different players in this tier, and my number 1 overall running back is going to be Jahmyr Gibbs from the Detroit Lions, 22 years old. Currently on Dynasty Data Labs, they keep track of startup draft data over the past month. So for the entire month of January up until here we are, the beginning of February, they've kept track of startup dynasty drafts. And Jahmyr Gibbs right now is the second running back going off the board. He's being drafted at the 201 right now, so the 13th overall pick. We're talking a standard 12-team Superflex PPR Dynasty League, and he's going at the 201. He averaged 21.3 points per game last season, the number 2 running back in terms of points per game for fantasy. He was the number 1 overall running back in terms of total points, thanks to that final stretch run that he had without David Montgomery. So I have him at number 1. I'm going to bring up my number 2, which is Bijan Robinson. He's the other player in tier 1. He's 23 years old. Although I will say that Jahmyr Gibbs does turn 23 in March. So in terms of age, Gibbs and Bijan Robinson are not all that different. And Bijan is going at the 110. So he's going a couple spots ahead of Gibbs. He's averaging 20 points per game. And so, to me, these 2 players are the clear elite running backs. These are the only 2 running backs that I think you can project for more than 2 to 3 years in the future. And that's important because, for the most part, running backs cannot be projected out into the future more than about 2 years. We see it year after year after year. There are established running backs that lose their jobs. There's somebody that gets drafted. Injuries happen. We saw this with Travis Etienne this year. His value just dropped off a cliff. So generally speaking, 2 to 3 years is about as far into the future as you can look at the running back position for the most part. But I feel that there are 2 guys, Gibbs, Robinson, that I think you can look more in the 4 to 5 year range. They are 22 and 23 years old. I think they are fairly safe projections that they will play into their, age 28, 29 type of seasons. And not only can you project them to last more than your traditional running back, but they're at the very top of the position. Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson are outstanding running backs. In terms of talent, they're right there with Saquon Barkley, who, normally would be near the top of this list, except for his age coming into play here, which we'll talk about him in a minute, though. But Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, the reason I have Gibbs ahead of Robinson comes down to the simple fact that Jahmyr Gibbs has outplayed Bijan Robinson through 2 seasons, despite sharing a backfield with David Montgomery. Now, I have every bit of confidence in Bijan Robinson that he will continue to get better and be this 3-down great running back. Somebody that can carry the load, that can average 20 points per game and be an elite level running back. But Jahmyr Gibbs has averaged more points per game through 2 seasons than Bijan Robinson. I think we saw a glimpse of just how good he can be in for fantasy football at the end of the season when David Montgomery was out and Jahmyr Gibbs was handling that entire load for Detroit. I mean, we're talking Christian McCaffrey in his prime levels of good. I mean, he can catch the ball, elite runner, elite speed, touchdown machine. He led the entire NFL in touchdowns this year. So a lot to like about Jahmyr Gibbs. And I know that they're losing Ben Johnson, but it doesn't concern me a lot. I have a lot of trust in Dan Campbell and that system. Their new offensive coordinator that they've brought in did a lot of nice things as the passing game coordinator in Denver, and he had previously worked with Dan Campbell in Detroit. So I don't know that the loss of Ben Johnson is going to hit this Lions offense as much as people might think. And so, given all these factors, I think he is an awesome player to target at the top of the second round in startup drafts, and he is my number 1 running back. Bijan Robinson, on the other hand, still a great pick, and I do like him a lot in terms of a startup. Gibbs and Robinson are the only 2 running backs that I would be considering in the first 2 rounds of a startup, and I think that you can look at both of them at that 1-2 turn and feel good about it. In fact, given where they're being drafted, there are probably a lot of people that are, in fact, drafting them together at, say, the 112 and the 201 or something very similar to that. And I'd feel pretty good about that. It's a unique way of drafting in a startup. It's pretty rare. Most people are not looking to fill the running back position early. And in general, that can push talented players further down the board at the position. But again, we're talking about 2 very unique talents. This isn't, your average situation where you have guys in the second round that might lose their jobs in a year or 2. I don't foresee that being the case with these 2 guys. So that is why Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson are the clear-cut top 2 players on the board for me. And this is where things get a lot tougher when you move into tier 2 and looking at the rest of the running back list. So I do have 3 players together in tier 2, and I'll talk about them again sort of all together because I think you could rank them in any order and I would be perfectly fine with it. I changed my own rankings of these 3 players probably about 3 or 4 times while going through this. And even while recording, I don't know if I truly feel that confident in my exact order of these 3 players, but I do know that these are the 3 guys I like in a tier. So at number 3, I do have Saquon Barkley, 27 years old, playing in the Super Bowl. He's going to be turning 28 in about a week, actually on the Super Bowl, I believe. So the age is absolutely a factor here. And it's why part of me thinks that maybe he belongs more at number 5 than he does at number 3. And it's why you won't see me, arguing if somebody were to have him at 4, number 5, even number 6. But I think that he is still talented enough that he belongs in the second tier. And for this moment, I do have him at number 3 overall in my rankings. He is also the number 3 consensus running back off the board in startups right now, and he's going at the 210. So I think that's a bit too high. I wouldn't take him in the second round. I think he's a good 3rd round startup pick, but second round is a bit too rich for me to take somebody that's about to be 28 years old. Just not something that I'm looking to do, which is why in any startups that I participate in, this spring and summer, he's not a player that I will likely have a lot of. Now, I have him in a number of established teams already because I talked about him a ton on this podcast last offseason and how much I liked him, but he's a little bit too high for me in terms of startup rankings. But I think this is a good reminder of the difference between those top 2 guys and everyone else. Gibbs and Robinson you can look at in a long-term view because of their age and their production. Everyone else, it's a 2 to 3 year window. And so for Saquon Barkley, do you think he can play 3 more seasons at an elite pace? So his age 28, 29, and 30 seasons? I think he probably can. I think he's one of those few rare players that can continue to excel and play in an elite role despite moving past the running back age cliff. So we saw Derrick Henry do that this year. We've seen Alvin Kamara be very productive. We saw a number of older running backs this year continue to play well despite getting up there in age. Joe Mixon, James Conner, and Christian McCaffrey, he's going to be starting to get up there in age too. He's obviously battling the injury situation, and that's kind of what you run into in terms of risk. Because if Saquon Barkley, who has been injured before, suffers another injury, his value could just absolutely drop, very, very quickly. So that's something to be wary of in terms of a startup, and it's why I think 210 is a little bit too high. But I do think that if you're looking at a 2 to 3 year window, you're talking about the number 1, number 2, number 3 running back overall for each of these next couple seasons. It's hard to say no to that type of asset in fantasy football, given how much of a running back renaissance we seem to have had in 2024. Now, the other 2 guys in this tier 2, it's going to be Breece Hall and Devon Achane. So I have Breece Hall at number 4, Devon Achane at number 5. The consensus rankings have them flipped with Achane at 4, Hall at 5. They're both 23. They're both going in the middle of the 3rd round in startups. Achane's going at 305. Hall is going at 308. And Achane was better in 2024, without question. He finished with a better average, more total points, and he didn't suffer the same level of injuries that Breece Hall went through. And it makes it kind of a tough situation because the Jets, they're going to be a new coaching staff, and we saw Braylon Allen get some work and look good. So there's, some lingering questions potentially about could Breece Hall lose a little bit of his role, and could it be more of a, I don't think it's going to be a committee, but, could Allen eat into that role a little bit? I think it's possible. Now, the same questions, though, can be said about Devon Achane, because I don't think he's ever going to be somebody that has the entire workload in Miami. The difference, Devon Achane, much more explosive. He is a touchdown and long run type of player. He can catch passes, but so can Breece Hall. I think Breece Hall is a true 3-down running back. I think that he will bounce back. I think the Jets will move on from Aaron Rodgers and go a different route at quarterback. I think it's a possible landing spot for someone like a Kirk Cousins. We'll see what happens. I don't know that I expect the Jets to be able to get someone in the draft, but anything can happen in the NFL, so I'll have my eyes on that. But I expect Breece Hall to be someone that is a bit more sturdy, someone that I think will last a bit longer. I'm not that concerned about his production level. I think Devon Achane is somebody that could lose touches earlier in his career, just something where, he is a smaller guy. He's not somebody that's a workhorse. It just concerns me a little bit. Now, again, they're in the same tier. They're essentially back-to-back in consensus rankings. So I think the margin is very, very slim. But if you're talking about a mid-3rd round running back pick, I would still take Breece Hall over Devon Achane, but very, very close. Next up, I have 2 players in Tier 3. So you'll notice as we go, the tiers start to expand after Tier 3. But Tiers 1, 2, and 3, I think there's a very clear group with the 2 players in Tier 1, 3 in Tier 2, and then 2 players here in Tier 3. And these 2 guys are going to be at number 6, Bucky Irving, and number 7, Jonathan Taylor. So Bucky Irving, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he's 22 years old, and I think he was the biggest surprise out of the rookie class this year, which was very, very good at every other position. But Bucky Irving, along with Tyrone Tracy, were really the only 2 rookie running backs that were worth much of anything this year. And I think Bucky Irving is here to stay. He had some really nice numbers. I think he's going to be the clear-cut starter in Tampa next year. Rachaad White is still going to be there, but I just don't know that I'm that worried about him cutting into much. He's turned into more of a threat in terms of some of the receiving work, but I think Bucky Irving is the better player, the better runner, and he's being drafted as the number 6 running back in startups. So the consensus rankings right now are in line with what I have. With him at 6, and they also agree with Jonathan Taylor, at number 7. So these two players, they're going literally back-to-back, the 402, 403 in startup drafts right now. And Jonathan Taylor was better in 2024. He averaged 17.6 points per game, which was good for number 7 in average per game ranking. And in terms of their total points, though, they were back-to-back 12th and 13th. Jonathan Taylor only 2 more points than Bucky Irving. So I think this is something where we saw Bucky Irving really take over that job as the season went on. It's something where rookies, they start a little bit slow. They have to get worked in. They're not just going to be handed everything right away, especially when you're not a first or second round pick. With Bucky Irving being a later round pick, it's both impressive and makes sense that it did take some time for him to take over that role. And Tampa has a good offense. They have Baker Mayfield looks established. They're going to have a new offensive coordinator coming in, but the receiver situation is strong, and it's a good offense to be a part of. I think we're going to have a lot of points coming out of Tampa Bay, and somebody that's 22 years old, again, we don't like to project too far down in the future with running backs, but this is somebody that could get more than that 2 to 3 year run. Remains to be seen, but the age certainly makes him an attractive draft choice in the 4th round. Jonathan Taylor is someone that he feels like he's been around forever. He's only 26 years old. He still has a number of years left in his prime. And I was a little bit worried about him coming into 2024, given the Anthony Richardson situation, with Richardson potentially stealing some goal line touches, not providing as many pass catching opportunities for Jonathan Taylor. And that was there. He didn't catch as many passes this year, but he did show that he's still one of the true elite running backs in terms of just rushing the football. And so given that, still very productive player when he's healthy. I do have him at number 7. I just feel a little bit safer with him than I do with a few of the guys that come after Jonathan Taylor. And so even though I think there's an argument to be made about some of these other guys, Jonathan Taylor is just the stable, safe, reliable pick that, if you're looking to add your RB1 in the mid 4th round or even early 4th round of a startup, I think it's a sensible, fair pick to make. All right, now tier 4. So I do have 5 players. 5 players in tier 4. And I think this might be my favorite tier of players because I think that they come at a very good value in startup drafts. And this is probably a spot where I would be looking to take my RB1 come draft season. And so kicking things off for me at the top is going to be Kyren Williams, 24 years old. He is the 8th running back in startup ranking right now, according to consensus data. He's going at the 404, so he's actually going one pick after Jonathan Taylor. Now, I don't have him that high, so I don't have him in the same tier as Taylor and Bucky Irving, who are going at 402 and 403. So I do think there's some separation there that will cause me to not have much of Kyren Williams. But I do have him at the top of this list here in tier 4. Very good player. I think he's more of a volume play than a talent play. I think if you were to take him and plug him into some other offense, I don't think he would be anywhere near as effective. But the Rams are a really nice offense to have a running back in because Sean McVay gives everything to his RB1. They're a full, they ride one guy, and Kyren Williams is the dude. Blake Corum didn't do a lot this year as a rookie. He got injured late in the season. I expect it to be Kyren Williams again in 2025. And he's still a young guy at 24. So a lot to like here, which is why I think he will go probably a little bit too close to Jonathan Taylor for my liking. But it's a situation where year to year, I don't know what this offense is going to look like. Who knows how long Matthew Stafford is going to play for, how long. There's been rumors about McVay not wanting to coach for much longer. So that type of stuff gets a little bit nerve-wracking every offseason for Kyren Williams, especially for someone who wasn't an early draft pick and is not an elite athlete. But he is highly effective, definitely a volume play, and fits in nicely here at the top of tier 4 at rank number 8 for me. Next up is going to be James Cook, checking in at number 9. He's 25 years old. He's the consensus number 10 running back in Dynasty Data Lab's rankings right now. and he's going at the 504. So the 5th round is where I think I like taking a running back first if you're going to do it this early. I'm probably not drafting one of these top guys. Now, maybe this year I'll make an exception for one of these top 2 players if I can get one in the early 2nd. But generally speaking, I am one of those more traditional dynasty drafters that likes to take wide receivers and quarterbacks ahead of running backs in startups. So when we get to the 5th round, usually at this point, I have 2 quarterbacks, I have a receiver, maybe a tight end or 2, a second wide receiver, whatever the situation is. I've established what I think my core will be. And so this is a nice time if I'm looking to compete right away out of my first year build to nab a running back. So James Cook is one of 4 guys that's going in the 5th round in startups right now. So I like him a lot. 16.7 points per game this year was good for 11th in the league. He was number 8 at the position overall for total points. And he was the focal point of the Buffalo offense. Obviously, Josh Allen is going to be there for a long time. Great player, my number 1 quarterback in fantasy. And Josh Allen didn't have a lot of weapons this year on the outside. So James Cook did get a lot more goal line looks. He scored a lot more touchdowns this year. And he's still a good receiver. He can do everything. I wish that they would give him a little bit more workload. Give him some more of those touches we saw in the playoffs where they had Ray Davis out there, they had Ty Johnson out there. And I think Ty Johnson can be a serviceable pass catcher. We saw him with a few nice games during the year. But James Cook is their most talented guy. And it would be nice to see him on the field a little bit more. And I think that prevents him from being above Kyren Williams in these rankings because you just know you're never going to get that 95% snap share type of thing out of James Cook. He's going to be much lower. It'll be a little bit more than half, and you'll be wishing for more. But he is a very talented player, and that offense should stay good as long as Josh Allen is there. So that means red zone opportunities, touchdown chances for James Cook, and that keeps him at number 9 in my rankings. At number 10, I have Josh Jacobs, 26 years old, and he does turn 27 in about a week here in February. So I think that's really the big difference for me between Cook and Jacobs is age. There's about a 2-year gap, and Jacobs is the consensus number 9. So consensus still has Jacobs ahead of Cook, but only by 3 picks. Jacobs is going at the 501 in startups. He was a little bit better than James Cook this year. He had 17.2 points per game, which was good for 8th at the position, which is 3 spots better than James Cook. He was also 2 spots better in overall total points. So, if you have Jacobs ahead of Cook, I think that's perfectly fair. I can't really nitpick about that. It's really just an age thing for me. I think that you can get, 3 good years out of Cook. I'm not sure that you can get 3 more years out of Josh Jacobs. However, in the short term, Josh Jacobs should still be very good. He's the clear best player on that Packers offense. They don't have anybody to throw the ball to. Not sure that I'm entirely sold on Jordan Love. And they had the offense run through Jacobs this year. So Marshawn Lloyd missed practically the entire season due to injury. And it wouldn't shock me if Green Bay drafts another rookie running back. So don't be stunned if that happens. I think there's going to be a number of players that do take running backs that might surprise you, but it's a very good running back class. So there's going to be a lot of guys that lose jobs. I don't think Josh Jacobs is going to be one of those guys that loses a job, but I think it's something where we could see a replacement drafted. A lot of people thought that it would be Marshawn Lloyd. I'm not sold on that now, especially given the injury situation. But we could see, another 4th-round pick go to Green Bay, and that wouldn't shock me at all. Frankly, you could say the same about most teams in the league. So just something to keep in the back of your mind there. But I do have Josh Jacobs at number 10. At number 11, I have Chase Brown, Cincinnati Bengals running back. He's 24 years old. He's consensus number 12, and he's going at the 511. So he's the 3rd of 4 running backs that's going in the 5th round. And he averaged 15.9 points per game, definitely exploded and took off over the second half of the season. When he really became the guy in Cincinnati due to injury to Zach Moss. And I think it's going to remain that same way. I think people are a little bit fearful of Cincinnati taking another running back and turning it more into a committee or having Brown just lose his job. but I think he was good enough this year. He was really awesome for fantasy football over the latter half of the season. Again, 16 points per game and 10th overall in total points. Cincinnati has a lot of issues on that team, especially on defense. They're trying to bring back T. Higgins. I just don't know that this is a team that's going to be in a position to spend a lot of money or draft capital on another running back when it's clear that you have a guy that can handle the load. So I'm pretty bullish on Chase Brown staying the running back 1 in Cincinnati and having a sizable workload. Again, will they draft a guy in the 4th, 5th, 6th round to, help fill the Zach Moss role or be the number 3? Yes, it's going to happen. There's going to be someone, but I would be stunned if they spent any amount of sizable money in free agency on a guy or using an early draft pick on a running back. I just don't see that happening. If that were to be the case, obviously he would fall down my list quite a bit, but I'm very much in on Chase Brown. He was my guy going into the season. I was very high on him taking over that job, and I really liked what I saw. And he will be 25 in March, so it's not quite as nice of a scenario as you think by hearing, oh, he's only 24. He'll be 25 by the time the season starts, but still, he's in his prime. I think you can get a couple good years out of Chase Brown. So if you're looking again in that 2 to 3 year window, a good player to have. At number 12, I have Christian McCaffrey. He's 28 years old. He's the number 11 consensus player. So in the consensus rankings on Dynasty Data Labs, he is flipped with Chase Brown. He's going at the 505, so 1 pick after James Cook. And so this is why I mentioned that I like this range of players, because I think regardless of how you have these guys ranked, I think they're all somebody that you would love to have on your team as your RB1 in a startup draft. So knowing that you can get somebody of Christian McCaffrey's caliber in the 5th round, obviously there are the injury concerns, very significant, but he's only 28. I think you can get 2 more good years out of him if he stays healthy, maybe even 3. He's a player that if you're a contending team and he's on your roster, you're just going to hold him until he retires. It's kind of like the Derrick Henry situation. He's played so good for so long that at this point, you're just going to go down with the ship. You're probably not going to get enough to really make it worthwhile moving him. But he's so special when he is healthy and he's on the field. He can do everything. And getting him in the 5th round at the RB12 spot in my rankings, I think that's a pretty good place to be, especially considering that the depth at this position kind of drops off a cliff once you get into the mid to late teens. So another thing to keep in mind. And, if you're going to be drafting a player in the 5th round as your RB1, you might as well get somebody that can help you in the short term, right? Because you've stacked up on early round receivers, and you're looking to win now if you're taking a running back in the 5th round. All right, so there's the top 12, and that rounds out tier number 4. And now we head into our RB2s, so 13 through 24. I did add a bonus 25th player to this list because I thought he was worth mentioning. And there's only one single player in tier 5, so very rare that I have something like this, but I think it makes sense. I have Kenneth Walker III at RB13. He's 24 years old. He's in a tier of his own. He's also being drafted essentially like he is in a tier of his own, according to Startup ADP. He's going at the 603. He's the only running back going in the 6th round, and I think he's a step behind Chase Brown and Christian McCaffrey, but I don't think that there's another player in terms of startup value that can be really in the same conversation as Kenneth Walker. So given his age, the fact that he did put up 16.5 points per game last season when he was out there, which was good for number 12 at the position, that's a player you want to have. And 6th round is really good value. The key here is twofold. One, it's health. He has to get on the field and stay there. He's had a lot of injury issues, and that makes him someone that it's hard to trust, where you would want to make sure you have his handcuff, which brings us to point number 2, Zach Charbonnet. Also a very good running back, someone that has shown he can carry the load when Walker is not healthy. And that hurts Kenneth Walker's ceiling because it's unless Charbonnet suffers an injury of his own, this isn't something where Walker's going to just get the entire backfield. Charbonnet is going to get some of his own carries, and that does limit the ceiling. But still a very good player, talented, somebody that you love to have on your team. And I think that the 6th round is quite fair. So he's on his own in Tier 5, Kenneth Walker III. All right, now Tier 6, we get back to a big tier. So Tier 6 and Tier 7 each have a lot of guys. So I think Tier 6 actually has 6 players. And this is what I would say, with the exception of maybe the first name, sort of your older, productive, veteran running backs that are going to help you in win-now builds, but are not going to be around forever. So the caveat for all of these guys is you will likely be happy in 2025, but there are no guarantees as to how good they are in 2026, if they're even on a roster, or what their situation will be. So I'm going to start off this tier with Chuba Hubbard, 25 years old. He's the youngest player in Tier 6. I have him at number 14. He is RB 15, according to Startup ADP at his position. He's going at the 707. And to me, this is a player that is kind of undervalued. I mean, he was really good this year. He helped you out a lot if you were able to nab him later in drafts, regardless of format. Everyone thought that Jonathan Brooks was going to be taking over that backfield, but then he had, more injury concerns and then was out for the rest of the year. And he's going to be out again for probably some time in 2025. And I don't know that Jonathan Brooks is ever really going to be a starting running back in this league. I think that these injuries are really going to ruin his chances of being a truly successful fantasy running back, which is a bummer. It really stinks for him. He was the RB1 in his class, and it's just not going to work out. So unfortunate situation for him, but good for Chuba Hubbard. He got a contract extension. He got some sizable money in his contract, and he averaged over 16 points per game, which is good for RB13. He was RB15 overall in total points. And given his age, I think that you can expect multiple seasons of good production. So he doesn't quite fall into the same bucket as the rest of these guys in terms of age and what to expect. His concern to me is less age and more, okay, what happens in 2026 when Jonathan Brooks hopefully is healthy? Could that be finally a committee then? Maybe. But again, in the mid-7th round, somebody here, you're not looking down the road too far. So Chuba Hubbard, my 14th running back in my rankings. At number 15, I have Joe Mixon. So he's 28 years old. He's the RB16 off the board in startup drafts. He's going at the 802, and he was great in his first year in Houston. He was 9th in points per game, 17th overall in total points. And he had a bit of a tough stretch to close out the season, but he played a lot of really good defenses. I think if you were a manager, you probably looked ahead once you got to kind of your league trade deadline and you saw, oh man, the next few weeks might be a bit rough. Fantasy playoffs, not the best type of situation for him. And that's pretty much how it played out. But still, very productive player and someone on that Houston offense that is still going to be an upper echelon offense, I think. He was good. And at 28 years old, who's to say he can't play, have 2 more good seasons as a good fantasy running back option? We've seen some of these guys kind of change the game when it comes to age at the running back position. It used to be they'd hit 27, 28 years old, and all of a sudden everyone would drop these guys to the curb. And it's kind of what happened last year. I mean, nobody wanted Joe Mixon on their roster. And yet here he is as, an RB1 in points per game. So a lot to like. And again, in the 8th round, I think that is really good value for Joe Mixon. At number 16, I have Derrick Henry. So the ageless wonder, he's 31, and he's the RB14 in consensus startup ranking right now at the position, going at the 609. So he's going ahead of Joe Mixon by a full round and a half. He's going ahead of Chuba Hubbard, and I think that's a bit too much. I think with Derrick Henry, you are in a true year-by-year type of situation with him. You can't count on 2 years from now. Certainly not 3 with someone that's 31. Age eventually does catch up, and at 31, it already feels like you've gotten a couple extra years out of Derrick Henry. And now he's on a great offense, a better team, obviously has Lamar Jackson. So it won't shock me at all if he is still very good in 2025. But the age is what keeps him down here and puts him into tier 6 for me. If you're in a redraft league, I think it's a different story. But for Dynasty, this is not somebody that you're taking in the 6th round in my mind. There is no 31-year-old that's plays running back or wide receiver that I would be looking to take at that age that early. He was awesome, number 4 running back, both in points per game and in overall scoring. So you couldn't have asked for anything better if you have him on your roster or you traded a second-round pick for him in the offseason. So, the prices for Derrick Henry were pretty low, and you probably capitalized if you weren't afraid of that age cliff and you went out and made a move. So price now going to be a little bit higher. You're probably not going to have to give up a late first-round pick to get Derrick Henry. And again, this is something where, like Christian McCaffrey, if you have Derrick Henry, you're keeping him on your team, you're holding on for as long as you possibly can, and you're going to hope that he can continue to give you good fantasy football production until he finally retires. And I think that's really how you play it out with him. He's not somebody that I'm trying to trade away or trade for. It's just he's a hold in Dynasty. At 17, I have another more elderly running back, which is pretty wild to say for someone who's only 29 years old, but that's Alvin Kamara, New Orleans Saints running back, and I have him a couple spots ahead of consensus rankings. I have him at 17. The consensus has him at number 20, and he's going at the 8-10 in startup drafts. And he averaged 18.9 points per game, which is good for number 5 at the position, number 9 overall in terms of points, and he's had his own injury issues. He's tied to the Saints, though. He's got that solid contract. He's not going anywhere. But New Orleans has a pretty rough offense. It sounds like they're moving towards hiring Kellen Moore, the Eagles' offensive coordinator, although that won't be finalized until post-Super Bowl. But that offense does scare me a bit. But Alvin Kamara is the clear, talented, the workhorse running back, the clear best player in that offense. I think Chris Olave is a good player too, but everything goes through Alvin Kamara still, even though he's been around for what feels like forever. And I think he's going to have another season where that happens. So if you're talking back of the 8th round, I think that's pretty good value there because presumably you've built a team full of other guys that are going to step in and help you right away. And you're getting an RB1 in the 8th round, back of the 8th, potentially the 8-9 turn. I can't argue with that. I think that's a good spot to be. He's a pass-catching guy, and I think you can get at least one more year, if not 2, out of Kamara. Now, at number 18, I have David Montgomery, Detroit Lions running back. He's 27 years old, and I do have him here still in tier 6, and one spot behind consensus, which has him at number 17. He's being drafted at the 805, 15.8 points per game, which is good for number 16, and he was number 18 overall in total points. He obviously missed a few games at the end of the season, so that definitely affected his numbers. I think he probably would have been an RB1 in total points otherwise, but David Montgomery is a workhorse. He's a great player. I think he might be a better real-life player than a fantasy asset at this point, given the injury and just his situation with Jahmyr Gibbs. But if you're talking about somebody that's going to be the second or third running back on your team, it's nice to have. I mean, I'm a little bit worried that we will see the shift to Jahmyr Gibbs as the true number 1. Last year it was still, it was David Montgomery was the starting running back, and then Jahmyr Gibbs was the guy that came in and it rotated after that. But nobody, you could ask any Detroit Lions fan. David Montgomery was the starting running back of the team, and I'm a little bit worried that it might be flipped next year, which is how I think it should be. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is the more talented player, and he's probably going to be used a little bit more. David Montgomery still going to be the goal line guy, still will get work. He's going to get those tough yards for you. He can still catch the ball. He's not just a grind it out short yardage back. He can do everything. He's just not as talented as Jahmyr Gibbs. So I think he's going to give you RB2 type of numbers, and he still has a couple years left. He signed an extension in Detroit. I would expect him to finish his, valuable fantasy years, I should say, in Detroit over the next 2 or 3 seasons. And, he's still only 27. So David Montgomery checks in at number 18 on my list. At number 19, and the final player in Tier 6, is going to be another veteran, and that's James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals, 29 years old. He's number 24 in consensus startup position, so the 24th running back off the board. So I do have him a few spots ahead of consensus. I feel like I've been higher on James Conner for the last 4 seasons, and every single year it pays off. So I'm not going to stop now. He's going to be the starting running back again in Arizona next year. Sign an extension. I'm not worried at all about Trey Benson, who didn't do anything as a rookie. And James Conner, he is going in the middle of the 10th round. So if you're, looking at this point, you're getting, your RB3, RB4, a flex play. Maybe if you are really lucky, you've loaded up on an awesome lineup and you can nab James Conner to still be your RB2. But that's a great value to me in the middle of the 10th round of a startup. Now, it's with the caveat that you might only get 1 year of James Conner as a starting running back, 2 if you're lucky, but still, 1 really good top 15 season from a running back in the 10th round. I think that's pretty good. He had 15.9 points per game. He was number 15 by that stat, and he was 11 in total points. So if you go by overall points ranking, he was an RB1 this year, and a lot to like. Moving on to tier number 7. So this is my final running backs tier, and I have 6 players in this grouping from 20 through 25, and we'll kick things off with another rookie. So Tyrone Tracy, he joins Bucky Irving as only the second rookie from 2024 to make this list, and spoiler alert, he is the only other rookie in my top 25 at the running back position. And he's an older rookie, though. He's 25 years old already. He came into the league late, played a ton of years in college, and he's going as the RB19 off the board in startups at the back of the 8th round, at the 809. So I think that might be a touch high, but again, I'm not going to argue too much with that. I think it's okay. I just worry a little bit about the age, given that he is already 25. He was a late round pick, so he's not somebody that has a ton of job security. And there is still Devin Singletary, but again, Tracy was better. So Tyrone Tracy should be the starting running back for the Giants next year. They'll have a new quarterback, and this offense is going to run through that new quarterback and Malik Neighbors. But Tracy can catch the ball. He's an effective runner. And he's a solid, RB3, I think, to have on your team. I don't know exactly how he'll do next year in terms of fantasy, but I think a back-end RB2 is a solid projection for him. He was 10.7 points per game, which was 34th, and he was 26th in total points. But again, he shared that backfield with Singletary for a lot of the season until about halfway through, when he kind of took over when Singletary got banged up and injured. So, his average and his total points is obviously going to be a bit low because of that. And I don't expect the Giants to replace him this year. I think that they will probably draft another running back on day 3 because that's, it's the draft to do it. But again, this is a team with a lot of problems. They need a quarterback. They need a lot of pieces. And I really don't think that front office is going to want to go out and spend a lot of money or draft capital on another running back, given that they seem to have found one that is a pretty solid player and they have other significant needs. At 21, I have DeAndre Swift, Chicago Bears running back. He's 26 years old. He's number 23 in consensus startup position ranking, and he's going at the 10.04 in startups. So he was the RB21 in points per game, RB19 overall. And I think that kind of fits exactly where he is. He's a good but not great player. He's fine. He averaged 12.6 points per game, which sounds exactly like what I would expect, something in that 10 to 13 range. And he's got, some nice things to look forward to with Ben Johnson coming over. He obviously loves to run the ball. very effective with the Gibbs-Montgomery pairing. Now, of course, there's going to be concerns that Chicago drafts another running back, especially since Ben Johnson and the Lions got rid of DeAndre Swift already once. Maybe Ben Johnson's not a big fan of DeAndre Swift. So this is something that could change a lot post-draft in April when we see what the Bears do. But for now, seems like he's going to be the starter. There really isn't much competition on that roster at the position. And if we expect the offense to take a step forward, I think he can still be a serviceable RB2 in Dynasty. All right, another guy at number 22 that I expect to have some rookie competition is going to be Isaiah Pacheco of the Chiefs. So he's 25 years old. I am 4 spots below consensus. So the consensus ranking for him at his position is 18th, and I have him at 22. He's being drafted at the 806 in startup. So I think that is too high for him. I probably won't have much of Isaiah Pacheco. It's a situation where as a late round pick, not a lot of reasons for Kansas City to just hold on to him just because, he's going to be on the team. But I think it's a situation where Kansas City is moving into more of a committee approach. Kareem Hunt played pretty well this year while Pacheco was injured. He's still playing a lot with Pacheco back. And I would expect another day 3 running back to come in here and compete for a role. But it's a really good draft. So we could see a team like Kansas City say, look, we've seen what Detroit, Baltimore, Philadelphia, these teams have done with, elite running backs. We've identified a guy in the draft that we think can also be elite, and let's go spend a first or second round pick on him and see what happens. It could be a good fit for a Caleb Johnson and a Marion Hampton, lots of guys. It's a loaded draft class at running back, so I'm very, very worried about Isaiah Pacheco getting his job replaced. But as of right now, just like DeAndre Swift, we don't know that for sure. He's still the starter. He's still young, still a solid player. The injury this year obviously gives us a bit of an incomplete picture, and he's going to be 26 at the beginning of March, so he's not necessarily a young player anymore, but a serviceable NFL running back, and given where we are in the rankings, I think this is a good fit. At number 23, I have Brian Robinson Jr. from the Washington Commanders. He's 25 years old. He's the consensus number 22 running back off the board at the 10.03, and he averaged 11.4 points per game, which was 31st in the league, and he was 29 in total points. He did miss a few games, but this is somebody that was essentially touchdown or bust. He's also a player that I fear could have his job replaced in the draft. So you kind of notice a trend here that once you get past, that top 17, 18, 19, the top 20, I think that once you get through tier 6, starting with tier 7 is where I start to feel, a little bit uneasy about these running backs. And maybe that's a sign that I should put Tyrone Tracy in the back of tier 6 because I do think I feel better about him than Swift, Pacheco, Robinson. But it kind of gives you a feel for where we're at. If you're drafting a running back this late in a startup and you're doing it before the NFL draft, you're taking a big risk. It's going to be a gamble. But Brian Robinson was a pretty effective player. He did score a lot of touchdowns. And if he doesn't lose his job, I think he'll be a fine player to have again next year. I would expect something similar. Bottom tier running back 2 is probably how I see him. And that's fine. If you need an RB3, RB4 on your competing dynasty team, if you're a rebuilding team, I'd be looking to get rid of him ASAP. But for now, he's my RB23 in my rankings. At number 24, I have Ramondre Stevenson of the Patriots. He's 26 years old. He's the 27th running back off the board, so I have him a couple spots ahead of consensus. He's going at the 11.03, and he had a pretty interesting year. So he had a couple nice games, a couple terrible games. He averaged 11.7 points per game. He was 28th overall in total points, 29th in points per game. He kind of lost his job at the end of the season to Antonio Gibson. I don't know that Antonio Gibson is the better running back. It sounded more of like a message that was being sent to Ramondre Stevenson, who had a big fumbling problem this year. But Mike Vrabel takes over as coach, so a new coaching staff. We don't know how they're going to feel about these guys. It's a situation where the Patriots have a ton of needs. Maybe they don't feel like spending a lot of money on running back, considering Stevenson just got an extension. But never say never. I think this is where, hey, they might draft another guy. Who knows what'll be the case. But if Stevenson remains the RB1, I think he will have a better season in 2025 than he did in 24. And I think this late in a startup in the 11th round, I'm willing to take that shot. And last but not least, what technically comes in as my first RB3, if you go by those types of rankings, where top 12 are RB1s, the next 12 are RB2s. My running back 25 is Zach Charbonnet. So he's 24 years old. He's 25th, so same exact spot that I have him in startup rank. He's going at the 10-10 in startups. And this is what I feel like Zach Charbonnet is the best handcuff running back in the league, because other than the obvious like David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs type of thing, like I don't know that truly counts. But in terms of player that is most certainly the backup, Zach Charbonnet is a great player to have because he's very talented on his own. I think he'd be a starter in a lot of places. He was drafted highly in the second round by Seattle. Seattle wants to run the ball, and Kenneth Walker can't stay healthy. So while Walker is an elite player, he's going to miss 3, 4, 5 games a year, it feels like. And so if that's the case, and you're getting Charbonnet late in drafts, that's a few weeks per year where you have a top 12 starter at the position. I mean, he was, 186 points total on the season for 25 overall at the position. He averaged 11 points per game, and that includes all the games where he served as the backup. Pretty solid numbers. So I think that's a really good player to have, on your bench, ready to plug in when necessary, because when those weeks do hit where he's the guy, you want him in your lineup. And at this late in the draft, there's not a lot of other guys like that where hey, if the starter gets hurt, this guy is going to get 12 to 15 points per game. Charbonnet can. He's that guy. So I'm a fan, and I have him slotted in at number 25. All right, so there you have it. There is my top 25 running backs for a Dynasty startup draft as of February of 2025. So it's pretty early in the year. We don't know yet, where rookies are going to go. Rookies will affect running back rankings more than any other position, because not only will, guys slide into these rankings, but there are going to be a number of guys that lose their jobs. So this year, I think there's probably going to be at least 5 or 6, if not 7 or 8 rookies that probably make their way into the top 30 and probably even the top 24. So I think just off the top of my head, Ashton Genty is going to be in the top 5. I think Ashton Genty is probably going to be my running back 3 overall. I think I'll have him in tier 2 with Saquon, Breece Hall, and Devon Achane. So that should tell you how I feel about him. And then other than that, there's going to be Caleb Johnson, Amarian Hampton, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, Cam Scattaboo. There's a lot of guys to like. Devin Neal. So a lot of those guys I think will end up somewhere in the teens. And then it depends where they go in the draft. If one of these guys goes in the first, if Caleb Johnson, Travion Henderson goes in the first round of the NFL draft, they're going to be right there in tier 2, tier 3 overall for this position. So that's going to affect things a lot. So definitely keep your eye on how things kind of shake out here as we go. And my advice to you just generally, if you've made it this far in the podcast, number 1, thank you. But number 2, just an added piece of advice. Don't draft running backs expecting them to just be locked in as your starter if you're doing it in February or March or April, because things are going to change. So if you end up with, Brian Robinson, Isaiah Pacheco, DeAndre Swift, maybe even somebody like a Joe Mixon or James Conner that feels like they're the starter, don't just draft your team and then sit. know that you're probably still going to have to do some work at the running back position leading into the season. Don't just feel comfortable where you are and just hope that things work out for you. And maybe that's some added incentive to draft one of the top tier studs at the early part of the draft. Maybe in the second round, Jahmyr Gibbs is sitting there in the early second. There's not a lot of slam dunk, locked and loaded starters. Maybe 15 or so, 15 to 17, depending on how you factor in some of the older players here. So just something to keep in mind. There's not enough running backs to go around for everyone in your league. If you're in a 12-team league, we just went through 25 running backs. You're not feeling great if you have to start the bottom few players on this list. And there are going to be teams that have 3 or 4 of this top 24. So keep that in mind as you do your draft prep. And hopefully things work out. So there you have it. Next week, we will be moving on to wide receivers. It'll be Super Bowl weekend, so a lot to look forward to with that. And with that being said, thank you all so much for tuning in. I appreciate you. This is the Dynasty War Room Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you all next week.